Welcome to the Measure Up podcast. I'm your host, Simon. What are you still doing here, buddy?
Ah,
You're the guest the guest last episode.
yeah.
Sure.
No, I honestly, I don't know about you, but I had such a good time. I honestly thought, hey, why not just hang out a little bit? Maybe I don't know, make myself a latte, see who you're gonna interview next week. Just see what might happen.
Sure. The more the merrier. But since you're here, do you want to be my co-host?
Oh, Jim, thought you'd never ask. With our powers combined, we will measure up. All right. I'll be here all week, folks. And I think in perpetuity. But this is going to be fun. Hopefully, folks will get more of my obscure 90s references.
Your powers combined.
Yeah.
I am Captain Planet.
Captain Planet, he's our hero. Gonna take pollution down to zero.
There's the reference. There it is.
I love that. Absolutely. Going to take data bloat down to zero.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, who do we have this week? What's going on?
Well, Simon, I'm glad you asked. Today, we're talking about marketing measurement education, how we learn it, what we learn, how to deal with teaching and learning technical subjects effectively. Now, I don't know about you, Simon, but I'm no expert in pedagogy.
A what?
I had to look up how to pronounce the word to make sure I said it right because
Yeah.
I thought it was pedagogy, but apparently it's pedagogy according to Google.
I imagine there's a group of 8th graders around there preparing for the next spelling bee that know how to spell it, though. So
Probably, yeah.
Maybe consult with them. But yes.
Fortunately, we're lucky to be joined by someone who knows a thing or two about a thing or two. And his name is Myles Younger. He's the head of innovation and insights at U of Digital, where he leads new product development, tech services, and thought leadership to help scale the company's educational offerings to new formats, new learners, and new markets. He's been in the advertising industry for nearly 20 years, spanning client side, agency side, even founding a dynamic ads platform that was successfully acquired. He also offers up plenty of spicy takes on Twitter, like disc golf stores are the vape store of sporting goods. And apparently you can't get a good Italian sub on the West Coast.
Let's discuss.
They add mayonnaise in addition to the oil and vinegar, which is just disgusting. And yes, I went way back in your Twitter timeline, Myles, to find those gems, by the way.
Thank you for doing so. This is you're brightening my day by reading me my old tweets.
I bet you didn't know that you were running for publicly elected office today, and that we're here to do the vetting of you.
Well, I had so many petty grievances, that I harbor.
There's some good ones in there. You got to go back and look at them. But welcome to the podcast, to the Measure Up podcast, Myles. The main theme of the episode today is technical and marketing measurement education. But before we dive into that, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and some of the work that U of Digital is doing.
Yeah. Glad to. And thanks for having me on. This is great. You mentioned in my intro, I've been working in marketing and advertising for around 20 years. I think technically my career started in 2004. So I think maybe we're more like 19 years at this point. I had a pretty typical kind of start in B2B corporate marketing within, tech companies. I worked for Wells Fargo for a little while, just kind of bounced around. And then in 2008, I started a small company called Can Banners. It started out as a Flash-based banner ad builder, which was a fairly novel concept at the time to build banner ads, aka display ads, using kind of pre-built templates and really trying to introduce a lot of efficiency into the ad creative process. That didn't scale super well, obviously, with Flash being killed. I don't even remember what year it was now. That aspect of it had kind of a short lifespan and got into dynamic ad serving, pivoted the business over to dynamic ad serving, which did much better. And I built that platform hands-on. And so, kind of got a really close look at, so to speak, how the sausage is made within the world of ad tech, and that was really interesting. And that got me just into the world of ad tech, the ad tech community, and I've kind of never looked back from there. And then after I sold that business, I went to work for a company called Mighty Hive, which later got merged into S4 Capital, aka Media Monks, which is what it's now called. And I ended up kind of taking on a bit of an explainer role inside of Mighty Hive and Media Monks. And it was very interesting because on the one hand, it was very kind of gratifying work to kind of be like, oh, Myles, he can explain this thing. He understands how it works, and he can put it into plain English, and that was very kind of gratifying to be in that role. But it definitely exposed to me how big of a need that is in the industry. That you're operating at the intersection of massive technology companies, massive changes in the way that advertising is bought and sold, massive changes in consumer technology. And it was very interesting to observe the extent to which just basic education and just being conversant on topics was such a big inhibitor, frankly, to call it progress, but at a tactical level, you might, and you talk to people out in the industry about this, and you get a lot of head nods of like, oh, I bet you sit on the same sort of call over and over again, possibly even with the same people, explaining the same topics to them, the same concepts to them over and over and over, kind of on this ad hoc basis and sort of talking in circles. And that was just a very interesting observation. And so, um, I joined U of Digital almost a year ago now, and essentially decided to put I guess my individual power of explanation to use via a company that exists solely to explain and to educate. And so that brings me forward to the present day, and that's what U of Digital does. We educate and we train teams across the digital marketing, advertising, and media landscape, essentially on whatever big topics are affecting their business, either today or in the future.
That's awesome. And by the way, you are such a prolific poster out there on LinkedIn and Twitter, obviously, as we know
It's an
from
addiction.
those hot takes on hot sandwiches. But the the piece of it though is, I really first started getting in your orbit, well, I guess several years now, but really a lot of the things that you'd post really made me think. And I think that you do a really great job of democratizing a lot of this information. And I think
Thanks.
there's this old platitude of that those who can't do teach, and I'm like, I think it's the other way around. Like it's if you're a doer, you're seldom a teacher, and there's almost like this degree of just like sort of knowledge hoarding, not because people don't want to share, but because they don't know how. That it's like when you teach someone to ride a bike, you're not going, hey, put your feet on both these pedals and do X, Y, and Z, and that is, it's just like stop going. But you're so good about breaking these pieces down and making it, I think, very accessible to CMOs, but also various other levels and organizations. And I always do what I call the my mother test, and it's could I explain it to my mother? And if I can't, then I'm probably overcomplicating it. And I think you absolutely excel at the my mother test.
Well, that's really kind of you to say. Yeah, I I think what you pointed out with the those who can't do teach. I think you're absolutely right. Is that those who can do are also able to teach.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that most of the teaching in our industry happens in contexts where it's not it's not treated as teaching. Nobody knows that it's teaching. Like, for instance, if you get on a call and you're trying to explain a new technology or new methodology to a client or a partner, and in order to get them to the point that they have any context for this new methodology, you have to do 20 minutes of sort of backstory of sort of
Yeah.
get them up to the present day. You're teaching in that time, but nobody regards it as such. And then you get on another call, and you're possibly having to cover the same territory again because this group of people also lacks that same context. And so I think one of the things that holds back the doers from teaching is a lack of any systematic approach or
Mm.
sort of any structure to it. Because once you start putting some structure to it, I mean, this is what we do at U Digital, but once you start putting some structure to it, it's totally possible for the doers to teach, and they make the best teachers because they have the best hands-on knowledge. They're the
Mm-hmm.
best at answering questions sort of off the cuff and thinking on their feet through a topic, and it can be really, really valuable to learn from doers. But doers are kind of constrained by honestly just lack of resources and lack of a system to educate people.
Yeah, I would say even I would take it further and say that teachers are the best doers, right? Because I learned a decade ago when we used to do Google Analytics in class, in-person classes. We used to teach Google Analytics classes back in the Lunametrics days. Um, and the first time you teach a class and you have like 30, 40, 50 people staring back at you and you're the person in the front of the room that has to teach it, like it's terrifying. And it really forces you to know it. Like you
Mm.
have to know it. There's no, hiding in the corner and getting away from it. Like first couple of times you teach it can be rough, but then like every question that someone asked that you didn't know the answer to, like you're going and you're looking it up and you're figuring it out. And like to really be able to teach something, you have to know it inside and out. And so like, yeah, the teachers, at least in this space, right? In this topic area that we're talking about, like those are the ones who
Mhm.
really have to understand it.
And Myles, you touched on something there, which was, the doers can teach, but they need a framework. They need a
Yeah.
methodology. What does that look like? Like it's like writer's block. It's like teacher's block, I guess, almost, right? It's I know all these things. How do I disseminate this information with you with just like without info puking and without jumping ahead and going, oh well, in order to understand this, we're gonna go back to 1983 and I got to tell you about this thing. And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
this makes sense to you who already knows this content, but to an untrained observer, they're just like, I don't understand anything here. Everything's jumping around. That's confusing. That's probably, I think, probably a sensation a lot of our listeners have.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that I'm actively working on at U of Digital. I wish I had kind of more specifics to share or some kind of magical playbook. We're not there quite yet, but we do this a lot with, the experts who come in and teach our workshops. Is we don't just sort of like pitch them in front of 30 people on a Zoom workshop and just say, okay, go. There's definitely structure to it, and there's definitely like you can make the act of teaching a particular like the domain or body of knowledge or whatever pretty systematic and pretty formulaic. It's most people don't think in terms. It's a lot of it is honestly like storytelling, and most people aren't walking around thinking about storytelling frameworks. But whenever I do like an onstage presentation, the first thing I do is I go back to my past onstage presentations and just copy the agenda.
Yeah, previous you was
Just
way smarter than current you. That's how I
yeah,
feel all
no,
the time. Like, who wrote this? Me?
yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
I'm
no.
wonderful.
If there's one thing I've learned at this point in my life, it is never discount the wisdom of past Miles.
Absolutely.
He's usually pretty spot on.
Although I will
No,
say one of the hardest things is like I'll be dealing with it. I'll be struggling with a topic and I'll Google it and I'll look at the first result and it's an article that I wrote. And I'll be like, I know I didn't answer the question then. And there's no other good results. What's going on?
See, I have the opposite problem. I always think future me is going to be so much smarter, which is why I don't comment my code and I leave things really vague because
No.
future me can figure that out. He's so
Oh,
smart.
yeah. That's a problem
Oh.
with future Jim.
Yeah, but nothing will make a person feel stupider than their own uncommented code from
Yeah.
yesterday.
What kind of maniac compiled this? I love it. But I know also, Jim, I just jumped in and started going off piece there. And I know you had actually some structure. So back to you as the teacher or the questionnaire, the interviewer.
Yeah. I guess, we don't have to have structure. It's kind of nice to be freeform, but we do have a couple of areas to dive into in case we ran out of things to talk about. And one of those, Myles, I know is near and dear to your heart, which is sort of the nature of learning and knowledge.
Mhm.
And, with regards to, marketing measurement and analytics and some of these technical topics, how do you think about sort of that underlying, like, what is the nature of learning? Like, what does that mean for us to learn marketing measurement, to learn analytics?
Yeah. I mean, there's just if I'm thinking about like digital marketing analytics, as one of the things that I immediately gravitate to is like just how the data is collected. I think a lot of, we call them whatever, business users. You might look at a report or a dashboard or something and not entirely, well, what you really run into challenges with is you have somebody who is essentially upstream at the data. So they are, I don't know, tagging a site or something like that. They're basically working at the origin point of the data. And they don't have enough knowledge or context to kind of tip over all the dominoes down to the point that the data is like actually consumed and put to productive use. And at the same time, the person who is furthest downstream at that point where they're putting the data to some productive use, so the analytics to some productive use, they don't have the knowledge of the context to go all the way back upstream. And I think partly this is just, again, it's the fact that nobody's really taken a systematic approach to resolving those two ends of the spectrum, if you will. And there's a lot of things in between. But you've got education or resources or whatever, content marketing that's very, very focused on all of those things that happen sort of furthest upstream, like at the point of origin for the data. And there's lots of technology and things that happens up there, and it's very, very technical. And then you've got some resources and stuff that focuses more on the downstream side, where things are more strategic, maybe more sort of metric or KPI oriented, or more business oriented. And I haven't seen like a lot of organizations or people try to connect those two things. I think partly because it's, these are respective sort of markets, and there just hasn't been a huge need to connect these things up. But when I think about sort of the nature of learning and education with respect to like digital analytics, digital measurement, I really do start to think about the challenge of getting somebody who's at either end of the point of origin of the data or the use of the data, and getting them to be able to understand that entire chain of custody in either direction.
That is, I mean, look, that is a very real challenge. And for what it's worth, it's one that I think is getting even more eyes on it at this moment in time, as we see challenges to signal quality, as we see, quite honestly, a more data a C team, or marketing leadership with a greater desire to actually get to the point, to get to that point of utilization, which I think is just, that's the industry in general as has been growing and so forth. But is there anything in that scenario? I look at that and go, well, it sounds like there needs to be more education in that. But is there anything that's sort of like inherently unique to teaching data practice, or teaching within the space, that makes it a challenge? Because to your point, like, it's hard to connect these dots. Why aren't folks doing it?
So the one of the number one things that leaps to mind, and this is something I turn over in my head often, is in the digital world. So like one of these questions, that we all ask ourselves is, why is this so challenging? Why was it perhaps not as challenging with older forms of traditional media, whatever? And one of the challenges that is unique to digital, and this is true at either end of the spectrum, but I'll pick on the sort of data originators, if I may, is that you can collect a theoretically infinite amount of data, even on like a single web page. You could set up many different dimensions of analytics that you could be collecting just from a single web page, single user, single session. There's a million different things you could collect, and there's really nothing stopping you, because it's digital. Like there's no physical constraint to how much information you could collect. And so
I feel like some of our listeners sitting there going, no, the limit of what Google Tag Manager can store is X. There is a finite amount of capture storage space.
And if you're hitting memory limits in Google Tag Manager, maybe you've
tracked too much, probably. I think is probably the takeaway from that.
Guilty as
That's when you load a secondary Google Tag Manager container within the first one. Nested GTM.
I've
no,
had
well,
hit payloads exceed the volume before. I'm sad to
Jim,
say.
it all comes out. Jim is an undercover data hoarder.
Well, and to pick on people at the other end of the spectrum, there is no that you can generate a theoretically infinite number of reports and data cuts, and you can get kind of analysis paralysis. There's again, there's no constraints at that end either, and so you know you essentially almost have this sort of like maybe hourglass shape of like infinite possibility on the origin of data, and then infinite uses of data. And so people have just kind of gotten sucked into their respective rabbit holes at either end of that spectrum, where the technologists and the people who, work every day hands on keyboard in MarTech platforms or analytics platforms or ad tech platforms have gone way, way down a rabbit hole on optimizing those platforms, kind of disconnected from the actual sort of practice of marketing and advertising, which really is not a button pushing exercise. It's more art than science, really. And then you got people at the other end of the spectrum, business users, who are just gone off the deep end, kind of customizing dashboards. Again, sort of navel gazing in dashboard world, utterly disconnected from kind of the practice of marketing and advertising. So I think that's one reason is it just there's an infinitely deep pool you can dive into at either one of those ends. And so then it's nobody wants to build that bridge because I'm happy just kind of like navel gazing at my end, and I don't really care what the other end is doing.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. It's just it is infinitely deep, and therefore there's no flaw to it for that for a lot of folks. And I think to your point, they do spend a lot of time in those weeds. So interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like it's one of these things where, if you go back 20 years, maybe 30, maybe 25 years, 30 years, something, like back when websites were new, this new technology.
Back when Captain Planet was on TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the days.
After school, we'd rush home to watch Captain Planet.
Absolutely.
But no, like back in the day when you had like a webmaster and they did the data collection and they did the analysis and they created some dashboards and they did it all because like they were the only person who knew how. And, as things kind of matured and evolved, you could get into more specialization. So you don't just have a single webmaster who does everything because they do know how to do all of those things. Maybe they're not super business savvy, but they're maybe probably a little bit more on the tech side. And they know how to code and do all that kind of stuff. But then as it's matured and things have specialized, you have like the coder and you have the analytics person who's tagging the site and the analytics person who's in the dashboards and then the BI person who's kind of doing the more business analysis. And the more specialization that occurs, the more fragmentation there is and the more bridges you need to build between those people to kind of, bridge those gaps in knowledge or, there's a necessity for the business user to learn a little bit about how the data is collected and the limitations and all of that. And, or the person who's tagging the site to understand the needs of the business user and what kinds of questions they're trying to answer. Right. So like, I feel like you could go a couple of ways, right? You could either try to educate the specialists, or you could educate a person who acts as a bridge between them, to doesn't need to have that deep knowledge, but knows enough about both topics to be able to kind of interpret and translate.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's another like frame that I put sort of, I don't know what you would call it, just our entire industry in often is just putting everything on a timeline and sort of trying to unpack why things are the way they are by going back, through that timeline to remind ourselves of how we got to, where we are today in 2023. And, you whatever, go back to the mid 90s, let's call it, and the advent of kind of the consumer internet. And so, like what was the first thing? I guess it was like websites and maybe some basic HTML and maybe whatever, running a web server off your home computer, and then maybe email, and then what comes after that, like maybe search or banner ads, and then what comes after that, and eventually, I don't know, you have mobile, then you have video, and you have social, and none of these things happened at once. So like businesses and people in their job roles never needed that sort of broader domain knowledge because everybody just existed in their silo for a certain number of years. I mean, you can still exist in silos, but as things sort of start to converge upon one another, I think there is like now a heightened need for um, going across domains, kind of going across ecosystems because we're now at a point where a lot of those things that were able to exist in almost completely independent silos for years and years and years are now having to integrate with other different marketing channels are having to integrate with one another. Things are blending together. Technologies are kind of blending together and being integrated. And so I think there are a lot of businesses out there that are sort of facing this question of like, oh, wow, after whatever, a quarter century or 30 years of, the internet, suddenly we've got all these organizational silos, technology silos, mental silos that it just doesn't work that way anymore. It worked that way, 15, 20 years ago, and it just doesn't work that way anymore.
Well, and it's such an interesting idea. As you're talking through that, I'm thinking about how do cities form? And a city doesn't just. Some cities just grow up out of like they're fully planned, but most aren't. Right? There's some
Yeah.
organic. There's a little town, and we'll call that data capture town, or we'll call it webmaster town. And then there was a little town over here, and we'll call that econometrics town. And over time, both of those towns have just grown and grown and grown until you've now said, well, we're kind of interconnected. And if you were to redesign Analytics City from the ground up, you probably wouldn't put them in these weird little locations and have these
Right.
little bridges that they form. And some people move between the cities, but there really is no sort of centralized government that they're all responsive to, right?
Yeah.
And from an urban planning point of view, I look at that and say, well, that's why your roads, go in these weird directions. That's why you've got a one-way system that doesn't work. I think that is very analogous to the way that the modern
Yeah.
data organization has grown because it was organic and it was falling forward, and there was always this just, hey, there's these new novel things that we're going to do, but it was never from this overarching comprehensive architecture point of view.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, Portland, where I live in Portland, Oregon, is full of those little spots where you can see where one neighborhood grew this way and another
Yep.
neighborhood grew that way, and
Yep.
the street never quite met up. And so this weird jog in the street of like, if you're driving, you have to be like quick and like
Yeah. Oh,
jog
it's
to
an
the right or jog
insurance
to the left.
assessor's nightmare. That is sitting there going, why is everything off by 10 feet? This is, 10% more accidents happen here. And I think that you can make the case too, like 10% more data loss happens here in organizations because you built your
It-
pipes independently and there was never a comprehensive plan to build a tunnel.
Yeah, yeah, and so one of the, I think, things driving the need for better education and more, say, holistic education, whatever, just in a basic sense of bridging the technology side with the business side, is the fact that like the technology and organizational debt that has accumulated over 20 to 30 years, I think is now reaching a point where organizations are having a hard time absorbing very much more of it. Like you can only absorb so much of it until you have to start to pay down some of that debt from the past. You're never going to fix all of those things overnight. But let's face it, like 20 to 30 years of the internet is a long time.
Yeah.
This isn't like, oh, whatever, 5 years of tech debt, no big deal. Like, no, we're talking multiple decades at this point. We're spanning two centuries, people.
Has
And
Google
so
Tag Manager been around for a decade at this point? I think it may have.
Oh.
Which makes me feel very old if that is the case. Because I remember when it came out thinking, oh, this is amazing. And now I'm thinking it has probably been 10 years. At least.
I think I first became aware of it in probably about 2014. But that was just me. It could have predated that, but I know at least 2014.
To the internet.
I'm checking right now.
Oh, very good, very good.
Hey, I remember being super happy that Google Tag Manager got because it was originally free, right? That was like one of its big claims to fame, right?
Yeah.
But I remember being really thrilled about that because I was still running my dynamic ad server, and like I gave tags to all my clients to deploy, and like it was just really cool that they now had and I realized there was other competing tag managers at the time, but being free was a big deal, and I just remember being really happy that they had some actual system for doing their tag management and building up a data layer and all that kind of stuff. And that was huge for me because my platform ran on tags. That was where all the data collection happened.
Yeah, Google Tag Manager is about to celebrate its birthday. Its 12th birthday on October 1st.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Wait, no, sorry.
Good timing.
11th birthday because, math and numbers. Yeah. 11th birthday.
11th. All right.
11th.
Well,
Yes,
still,
yes.
it's more than a decade.
Good thing this isn't about math and data.
Right.
I don't know if that happens to either of you, but folks within my organization, they'll come to me and say, "You're the data guy, Simon. Here's some quick calculations." And I'm like, I'm just going to let you know right now that like arithmetic and basic addition and subtraction is not my strong suit. Like I've reached a point where I'm like, a calculator is required for everything, right? An Excel function is required for everything. Even the most basic mathematics, I'm like, wait, what is the percentage? It's 1/2. Okay.
I can't do any of that stuff anymore.
Right.
My
Exactly.
9-year-old is like better at math than I am.
But you're the data guy.
Speaking about how to teach complicated subjects like math and arithmetic. You like that segue? That was just kind of steering us back on.
Smooth.
So yeah, I mean, ad tech, martech, marketing analytics. These are, I don't know where you would rank them in terms of difficulty to learn, right? There are certainly complex topics, right? You could go everywhere from like coding to statistics to machine learning. You could kind of encompass a broad array of things there, but just generally speaking, like, do you have a sense for like how complicated is it to learn the kinds of topics that we generally care about here on the show?
Not very. I mean, I've long been of the opinion that like learning the basics of a lot of this stuff really is not rocket science, especially for digital marketing and advertising. A lot of it. I don't know. I had an epiphany some years back of how much of MarTech and AdTech is. It's very, very big and fast tallying systems. Like it's tallies. It's like, and they're gigantic tallies. I mean, we're talking about, terabytes and petabytes of tallies. But, if you start to break that down, well, tallies aren't complicated. You could make a tally on a wall, like whatever. And so, that's one aspect of it, where I think if you build up from kind of core concepts like that, it's really not that challenging. And the technology itself, I mean, so much of it still runs on kind of basic web technologies, at least if we're thinking about the web, as opposed to mobile or other devices. It runs on web technologies that are now pretty old. HTTP, the DOM, JavaScript, things like that. These are not new things. And so I think they're all very learnable and teachable. I think one of the big things, if I'm thinking, go over to the ad tech side, I think one of the big challenges in learning about that side of the business is just the inherent messiness of the advertising industry, where ad tech is a manifestation of the advertising business, and the advertising business is really dysfunctional. And so a lot of the dysfunction, or I don't know what you might call it, ambiguity or confusion in the technology itself or the way it works or doesn't work.
Sometimes by design.
No, then that's my point, is that you kind of, you can get yourself tied up in knots trying to learn the ins and outs of these technologies when the meaningful knowledge was sort of staring you in the face, and it was totally just in how the business runs. It really had very little to do with, as I put it, these advanced tallying technologies. Because when you look at the advanced tallying technologies, I mean, that's the funny thing about MarTech and AdTech is like, AdTech in particular, is you look at these advanced tallying technologies and you think, shouldn't we have perfect insight into what happened? Weren't we taking a tally of literally everything the entire time? And, that's kind of looking at it independent of the fact that it exists in the context of this very, very dysfunctional and kind of like business where just so much stuff is happening in like backroom deals and is happening kind of in ways that are utterly disconnected from the way the technology works or is supposed to work.
Right. Or even they work different for different parties because of things that have been enabled or disabled. And, there's no sort of one way that this DSP
Yeah.
works or something like that. And because for what it's worth, as you were going through that, I was thinking like head tech for me is definitely the hardest. And I think you were touching some of these notes, but what it comes down for me, is the fragility of the industry and the number of false starts that are occurring as we think about solutions that are sort of designed to replace the deterministic identity and those kind of components, which I read a lot of what Google puts out there and others, and I think I understand this stuff pretty well. But then every so often I'll see a new solution come along where I'm like, what? I don't even understand how this thing begins or ends or like where this fits in this space because I don't know. There's just different levels of exposure to what's going on, and I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm not even trying to solve the right problem, or maybe I'm just second guessing myself and I should stick to my guns. I think that's the hardest part. Is like how informed do you need to be to make these types of decisions as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even personally pretend to have whatever an encyclopedic knowledge of take just the ad tech landscape, let
Yeah.
alone martech at this point. Um, I mean, my real sort of domain expertise, if you will, is all around kind of web based or browser based kind of data collection and kind of real time event driven stuff and personalization. Um, and when you get beyond some of that stuff, even I get like really hazy, really fast. And so, I mean, this is also getting back to what I was talking about with the, if you want to call it, tech and organizational debt that the industry has built up, is that I think we have reached a point now where the average professional, whatever, let's like sketch out some brilliant professional who exists in the marketing and advertising industry, is now outstripped a human's ability to stay on top of everything. I think it is
Yeah.
just quite literally impossible. Like it's just not possible for any one human. There are not enough waking hours in a day, a week, a month, a year to actually stay on top of this stuff. And it doesn't mean that you should like close off the world. I think it just, to your point, Simon, it does beg the question of like, okay, if one person can no longer do this, like again, go back 30 years and yes, Jim, you said there was a webmaster. There was one person who just could sort of keep on top of all of it. And now, if that's no longer true, like what are organizations' approaches for making decisions, or with respect to what I do with education, how are you going to solve these problems that come up now that we have crossed this Rubicon, where it's just literally not knowable by any one person anymore.
It's almost like you need the establishment of a data master, and that can be the new in vogue term. And I'll have data master at website.com.
So with that point about like there's literally just not enough waking hours for a single human being to kind of keep on top of everything, which kind of makes me think back to my earlier point about like everything's, as things grow and become more mature, there's more specialization. So like if I can't keep track of everything, on Google ads and Facebook ads and Google Analytics and this tool and that tool and all these other things, then I'm going to specialize in just one of those. But that's not always possible. You might have some people that have to learn more about everything. Smaller companies or some agencies where you just have to be a jack of all trades.
Even just maintaining your space in the market, right? Because when we think about folks who became Google Analytics experts and now we shifted to GA4, and you're like, whoa, that can make your standing fairly fragile if you're just a expert in one place.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Sorry,
Jim.
I played it perfectly. I left the Google Analytics consulting part of the company and moved into the data science side right as GA4 was coming out. So I'm like, skip that one.
Perfect.
But for the people who don't just cut line and what's that phrase about fishing? Cut line and cut bait and something about cutting bait or cutting line. Anyway, for the people who don't
say cut bait, I think.
Yeah,
I have no idea. But now I'm going to look up some fishing analogies.
See, this is what happens when you try to throw an analogy that you don't know into the conversation. Anyway, for those people who cut bait, if that's the right phrase, who can't cut bait, like how do you recommend that they go about staying on top of these technologies? Because like to Simon's point, GA4 comes out now, and now it's brand new technology you have to learn. Like things are constantly changing. There's new technologies, there's new platforms, tools, things like that. Like what's a good strategy for someone who's in the position? Maybe they're at an agency, maybe they're in house at a company, and they need to have a strategy for how am I going to stay on top of these? What would you tell them?
So yeah, if you set aside the possibility that you can sort of start from your own domain and just sort of like skip to adjacent domains continually until whatever you reach some end state where you've mapped out, I don't know, the entirety of your organization's, MarTech and AdTech stack. If that's no longer possible because there aren't enough hours in the day, I like to boil things down to even basic motivations, basic measures and KPIs to kind of be able to learn about adjacent domains without learning about the technology itself. There's still plenty to learn. You can learn like, okay, there's this adjacent domain. Um, what is it used for? What basic like metrics demonstrate its success or its failure? Who's the person who cares about that success or failure? What are they going to do if it succeeds? What do they do if it fails? And that then leads you into other adjacent things. And, you know, you can kind of start to build your own whatever set of dominoes that tip over to some endpoint. Again, whether you're at the business end and you need to get back to the technology end, whether you're at the technology end, you need to get back to the business end, or whatever it is, you can eventually build up, as I put it earlier, this chain of custody that's not technology based. It's just more based around motivations, for lack of a better term. So like that's one of the ways that I like to think about things, especially which as I do, I don't know, multiple times a week, I assume, having to put some technical concept into language that is entirely non-technical, like literally completely non-technical, no technical jargon. I mean, it's kind of it's a great thought problem. Like, how do you explain this technical concept, but you're not allowed to use a single word of jargon?
Do you
And
have perhaps an analogy showcase you could share with us? Are there any top of mind that come to you right now? Just like, here's a way I explained something that just like resonated and there was zero technical info included.
I mean, I published something to LinkedIn just a day or two ago about an old presentation that I gave at Programmatic IO in late 2019. It was about data clean rooms, which were not yet a thing at that time. I mean, they Ads Data Hub existed, but they just weren't as talked about. And this is less than 4 years ago, which is kind of nuts. They went from being kind of a relatively obscure topic with very very little public information about them to a whole burgeoning niche of the ad tech and martech industry, and that presentation, again, because this was a new topic and because I also just on a personal basis, I don't find it super like emotionally satisfying to give like hyper technical presentations where I just like bombard people with technical stuff. I actually am more kind of like gratified by the challenge of like, well, how do I explain this without being technical? And so in that particular case, like one of the ways I explained data clean rooms and this notion that you can um, make use of multiple sets of confidential data without leaking any confidential or private information is I set up this hypothetical where there were two hypothetical companies. One knows everyone's favorite color and the other one knows everyone's favorite food, and then there was a visual of kind of like an output table of like everybody who here's this is how many people whose favorite color is red and favorite food is hot dogs, and it's like 800 people. Favorite color is blue. Favorite food is pizza. There's like 750 people. And so it was just a way of explaining how you can have confidential data kind of flowing into the system, but the insights or analytics that are flowing out are entirely privacy preserving. So I realize that's not an analogy, but that was just an example that's kind of been top of mind for me lately because I just was writing about it on LinkedIn.
Yeah, analogies and given an example that is the simplest, like you can't simplify it any further. You get it down to just the least number of components of the example to give the example with, like, if you can do it with something memorable like food and colors. Because
Yep.
I'm definitely in the blue pizza group, and I'm glad there's 700 people. So I'm still
You're not
confident in
alone.
my
Yeah.
anonymity.
No one will know your dirty secret.
But yeah, those are and analogies. I love a good analogy.
See, with clean rooms,
Yeah.
I've always leaned into the idea of, and the challenge that I think I run into is almost a degree of oversimplification, and
Mhm.
I because I do feel like you can get too far away from it. In that, I will give an example that folks absolutely understand, but then they go, "So this is how clean room works," and I go, "Well, not quite, because this thing doesn't work, and this thing, and so you have to like build up from there." And the example that I've always used is like, let's say the three of us, I know a secret. Jim knows a secret, and about somebody else who's not here. And Myles, you can be our independent third party individual here, and I'm going to whisper you my secret. Jim's going to whisper you his, and you're going to let us know if those secrets are the same secret, and then Jim and I can talk about it openly. Or if they're not, you say nope, no dice. And I've got like 500 secrets, so I'm a pretty big gossip. Jim's got even more, all about all his friends that like Blue Pizza. So there's a good amount of overlap there, and that is essentially how a clean room operates. But when I share that type of analogy, I run into so it's like you can just like use, like, you can extract things out of this and you can talk about these things. I'm like, well, no, not quite. Like, it needs to be in a way that is still like preserving the privacy. And I only know it in aggregate. So it's not like I know that one secret. I actually just know like 500 secrets, and we don't actually know like completely which ones. It's complicated.
I think like clean rooms in particular are, and this applies to like many different technological concepts. If you're trying to explain them to somebody who's not even non-technical, they just maybe don't have the domain expertise of that
Right.
particular technology.
Explain it to
Is
a data capture engineer, even, right? Like
Yeah.
they just don't sit in this realm. They're like, I
Yeah.
just I dig the hole. Somebody else fills it in.
Yeah, well, and I think the thing with that's powerful about analogies is there's like a couple of different layers to why someone needs to or is compelled to know something. You may need it for your job, but a lot of times if you can explain some whatever arcane concept with an analogy, like 90% of someone's like further need to know just evaporates. They're just like, oh, I get it. Now I
Yep.
don't actually care about all the technical stuff because that's not actually relevant to what I need right now. But
Sure.
until you explain the analogy to me, I was just like hammering you of like, give me the, the schematics, give me all the documentation. Where's your API? Where's this? Where's this? And you like make it all go away with like, a car analogy or,
Right. Well, and
something.
clean rooms are a great example of that too, because I have had a lot of CMOs come to me and say, we need to invest in clean rooms. And I've gone, well, let's not prescribe the medicine before I can actually diagnose the symptoms. And it's like going to a doctor and saying, I have cancer. And the doctor's like, hold on. Let's actually just talk through what the actual, like, are you feeling sick? Are you throwing up? And like, I'll be the one doing the diagnosis here. And I think oftentimes, like, it's like we have prescription medication ads on TV, and you see that, and you come in and be like, I need this drug right now, and you're like, no, you've skipped the point of understanding about what it does, and the problem you have is not solved by this. Although clean rooms, I think, are particularly difficult because they do have so many use cases that even when I started thinking about clean rooms, I was amazed by the use cases I was just stumbling upon without even sort of talking about with folks. And then I would chat with folks and I'd be like, oh my God, you're right. It's so much wider than I think. Like, private conversion lift, like those kind of things are incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I mean, at least in terms of, if we're thinking about like data clean room use cases, and this could be applied to many different technologies, but it's I think getting to the point where it's essentially a raw material of the advertising and marketing world or analytics world or ad tech world or digital media world where, saying, oh, well, what are all the use cases for it? And that's kind of like asking somebody, well, what are all the use cases for HTML?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, right.
It's a raw material.
Yeah.
So anyway, no, that's just interesting to think about, because I go through the same thing of like, you rack your brain thinking about something like data clean rooms
Yeah.
or some other, type of technology, or I don't know, cloud technology or something like that. You're trying to think, oh, what are all the different ways? What's the sort of exhaustive list of ways that this could be employed, or possible ways I might need to explain this thing? And, it sometimes pays to just be honest with yourself, of just like, it's infinite.
Yeah.
I can talk about maybe the top three or something, or the top five, but
But this
otherwise
comes
it's infinite.
right. I mean, this comes back to one of your early points, and the most important part is not necessarily getting into the technical weeds. It's the concept, and that's what
Yeah.
so many folks fail on, and so many of the
Yeah.
classes and courses out there that you see are, JavaScript for digital marketing, and like those are awesome, and they have a place and they have a value. But to get to that point, you've really got to understand the overarching concept. Otherwise, all you do is just go deeper and deeper in that hole, and you lose that ability to flex across the two cities.
Yeah.
That was a really mixed analogy. That was like 5 different stories all into one right there. Wow.
Speaking of analogies, I hate to be the grumpy old man on his front porch screaming at the kids to get off his lawn,
Cut and bait.
but we do and cutting my bait while I'm doing it. But we do have to start wrapping up, unfortunately. But before we do go, we have something that we like to call the incremental insight at the end of the show, where we like to ask our guests to give our listeners something to walk away with, something that they can, that makes a light bulb go off in their head, or something that they can say, okay, that's a good article I'm going to go read, or listen to this other podcast, something that you have found to be very useful and you think our listeners will also. Myles, do you have an incremental insight for our listeners?
I don't know if I'd call it an insight. It's incremental. I think it's insightful. I think it's interesting. So I don't ask me why. I honestly don't remember. A couple of weeks ago, for some reason, I started pondering like how companies used to store information like in paper files and filing cabinets. And I just got to thinking like, wow, they probably were pretty sophisticated about it, because they didn't have any computers. Like, their paper files were literally, that was the totality of their information storage. There was no
pipes that would
alternative.
go around the buildings though with the suction.
Yeah, the little pneumatic tubes.
Yeah.
I know. No, like there was, very, and I just started thinking about it. I'm like, yes, there must have been just very, very sophisticated kind of information architecture back then. So anyway, I have it here on the table. I bought this book. I did some Googling on the topic, and there is very, very actually little information that is Googleable about this topic. But I bought this book.
I would imagine there'd be thousands of people wanting to learn about filing cabinets.
The Filing Cabinet, A Vertical History of Information.
The cover is as boring as I would hope it would be.
Yeah, a guy named Craig Robertson, who is, I think, a professor or something at my alma mater, Northeastern in Boston. Super interesting book. And so I will share with you one specific thing that I learned in this book that is technology related. So I learned that what we know as flat files, so digital flat files, whatever, a .txt file or something like that, the origins of that name actually date back to paper filing in like the 1800s.
Oh my gosh.
You used to have something called flat letter files, or just flat files. And the way that companies used to store, I'll call it data. This was data to them. The pieces of paper to us, but to them it was data. They would store correspondence typically chronologically. So it would be in this giant flat binder. And if you go to like antique shops and find old filing cabinets, if they're old enough, like say 100+ years old, they might be flat, because you would store these things in a flat format, in these flat binders, and then you would have to go through, just like a digital flat file. If you want a piece of information, if you don't already know where it is in that stack, you just got to start flipping through the stack page by page, because there's no index, right? Nothing's indexed. You just have to essentially read the entire thing into memory. So anyway, that's the origin of the flat file. Was where there were these actual giant flat binder things called flat letter files, and that's why this book is called A Vertical History of Information, is because it actually was a thing when the paper was turned up vertically. Like if you look
Amazing.
at this book has like old advertisements for filing cabinets, and it literally advertises vertical filing as opposed to flat filing. So
Amazing.
anyway, that's your tidbit of weird esoteric tech history for today.
I love it.
Wow.
I love
And I
it.
imagine then they also took some spreadsheets and put them on top of each other, and that's how they formed the data stack. Uh,
Where's my sound effect? There we go. There we
hey!
go. Sorry, I was a little late on the draw there. Oh man, no, I love this kind of esoteric. I didn't plan this, Simon. I wasn't planning on having an incremental insight, and this isn't even really an insight, but just a little piece of history today. When we're recording September 19th, 41 years ago today, the smiley emoticon was first used,
Oh, wow.
and officially the smiley emoticon is colon followed by a dash. It does include the nose,
Oh,
then
of
the
course.
parentheses for the smile. Yeah.
I sometimes wish that the nose was still included, because there are a number of times where perhaps I'll have some code on Slack, and I will have the colon with the parentheses, and it will convert to a smiley face, when really I'm like, no, that's literally how the URL is formed. And now I look like I'm ridiculous by having a little smiley face in there, a little poop over here. You know how it goes. Wonderful. I mean, Myles, thank you so much for coming on. You are such a wealth of information. What you are doing for the industry is so important. In not that you're teaching people the deep subject matter here, you are doing that, but you're really teaching people how to think and how to frame up concepts. And I think that is such a core mission that we, both Jim and I, as part of what we connected over originally was just curiosity and how we learn things and how we can share this out. And I know you're doing so much great stuff there. So if I could just give you a shout out to go follow Myles out there on Twitter and on LinkedIn. He is prolific. So as soon as you start following him, you'll probably see like 4 or 5 posts in his feed. I don't think the meatball sub content is coming that frequently these days, but I saw one. You're talking a lot about AI. You're talking about all these really interesting things. So it's definitely a worthwhile follow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks a lot, Simon.
And if anyone else wants to connect with you or wants to learn a little bit more about U of Digital or reach out to you, how would they do that, Myles?
Yeah, so U of Digital, you go to uof.digital, uof.digital. And yeah, me personally, I am, to Simon's point, very, very findable on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Awesome. And links in the show note, as they say.
Awesome. And then do they also say like and subscribe?
Oh yeah, smash
I don't know.
that like button.
Smash that like button. I feel like I'm doing podcast cosplay right now. This has been a blast. So thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest for my first pod with Jim here. And Jim, thank you just so much again for inviting me to be part of the show. And I can't wait to see what our relationship and how we grow this together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jim and Simon both. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right. Thanks,
Thank
Myles.
you.
And everyone else, we'll see you in 2 weeks.